David Dayen is the executive editor of The American Prospect. He has two pieces out, recent pieces in the new year. One that I think speaks to many of us right now, that democratic inaction will lead us back to austerity. And the other is, oh, this one's interesting, there is a bully pulpit. And this, of course, is in response to the Supreme Court decisions when it comes to vaccinations. So, David, let's start off with austerity. We're already in a recession. Like, haven't we learned that this is not how we get out of economic collapse through austerity? Like, can we look to Greece or Argentina or many places around the world, Puerto Rico?
Well, the issue is that obviously we've seen inaction in Congress for the last 6 to 8 months. At the beginning of the Biden administration, there was this belief that he had learned the lessons of the Obama recovery, that they were not going to go too small. They passed the American Rescue Plan. They were going to have a robust fiscal policy in order to bring us back from the ravages of the pandemic. And certainly the American Rescue Plan did that to a greater degree than the Obama stimulus. However, those things dissipate. They were temporary. And what we really needed coming out of the pandemic was sustained public investment. Our public investment is at levels that, and even in the Obama era, it was at levels about as low as the Eisenhower administration. We just don't do a lot of public investment.
Well, can you just sorry to, let's pause for a second.
Sure.
Explain what was going on with the Eisenhower administration. Like, this is coming out of a decade of a lot of investment. Eisenhower pumped the brakes.
Well, I mean, Eisenhower did the road program, but we just had a less robust public sector at that point, is what you really should say. And so, you know, the story of public investment was a story of increases through the Great Society and the programs that were sustained, hard to be killed even by the Nixon-Reagan era. And then they were expanded more and more as we went on. But they were truncated, they were cut back, particularly when Obama made the pivot to austerity after the Great Recession. And so we went back down to that very low level. What we're seeing now is because really nothing has been done other than the infrastructure bill, which is really a minor increase in the routine infrastructure spending that we do every year.
Right.
If you look at, there are a lot of reports that are put out on fiscal policy and what it does to contribute to economic growth. And in the Obama administration, we saw that after about the middle of 2010, that started to go negative. In other words, what fiscal policy was doing was taking away from economic growth. If you look at the same picture today, fiscal policy is now taking away from economic growth. In this quarter, it's actually 1 quarter earlier than under the Obama administration. So despite all of those headwinds, despite the American Rescue Plan, we are now in a position where fiscal policy is taking away from growth. And because of that, we're especially if we don't maintain this very robust consumer spending that we're seeing, any kind of downturn, we're not going to be able to use, we won't have the government policy in place to counteract that. So what have we seen recently? The child tax credit enhancement, that went away. That went away at the end of December. In May, the student loan payment pause is scheduled to go away. It was scheduled to go away at the end of this month, but it was extended until May. But in May, it will go away. So you have these things that are taking away from growth. They are adding, they're reducing benefits for individuals. In the case of student loans, they're adding costs, about $393 a month to every student borrower, which is about 45 million people.
It's insane.
And so, if there ends up being a downturn, an economic problem, we do not have the robust fiscal policy in place to counteract that, which means we're going to be, moving back into a position of austerity. So yes, it's a real concern.
And when you say austerity, where are we looking?
I'm not sure what you mean by where.
Well, I mean, obviously austerity, the large programs, but where are we going to be cutting back in our government? What is obviously making folks, student loans that's an ongoing program, but is that necessarily austerity? That's not austerity.
Well, I mean, it is in a sense, because for 2 years we have had no payments on student loans. No American who has a federal loan
Yeah.
has paid in the last 2 years, nor have they had any interest accrue in the last 2 years.
Right.
So if that comes back, that has the effect of austerity, right?
Austerity.
Because you're suddenly creating costs for individuals that weren't there before.
Mm-hmm.
And so that does exact a price, right? And the same thing with eliminating the enhanced child tax credit. I mean, child tax credit was $2,000 at a baseline. It went up to $3,000 for children over the age of 6 and $3,600 for children under the age of 6.
Mm-hmm.
So that $1,000 to $1,600 a year, which was being given out monthly. I mean, there's two things going on here. One, you're just reducing the cost, right? From 36 to 2,000. So there's a smaller benefit that people are getting. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that since July, that's been given out in monthly increments as a check that has gone into people's bank accounts. So that's not happening anymore. So they won't actually get the benefit of the child tax credit until next year, until next April. So whereas you were getting $250 or $300 a month per child, now you're not getting that. You're not getting that. You're getting $0. So that's a net reduction in your income, essentially your net income, including transfer payments. So you're not getting that anymore. So suddenly you have less money to spend on various things. So these things play together. If you have less money to spend, you have less purchasing power, particularly if you're low income. You're going to cut back your spending. And if you cut back your spending, then we're going to see that in the consumer spending statistics. And all those people, all these businesses that were hanging on because there was high demand for their services, for their goods, suddenly that demand has shrunk. The other problem that this gets a little bit wonky, but basically we've had these supply chain issues, right? It's hard to get stuff that has been produced into your store. So what a lot of businesses have been doing is they've been double ordering. They're like, we're not going to get everything. We might get some things. Let's double order to make sure we get something. And so we'll have something on sale. Well, if the downturn comes and suddenly there isn't the same level of demand that there was before, you've double ordered. Now you have a bunch of inventory that you can't sell. And it will magnify any kind of impact. You could see businesses fail. It will magnify the impact of any downturn. So there's a lot of volatility going on right now within the economy. And a lot of it is because we have failed to keep up with the various investments that we were supposed to make in the Build Back Better Act. This is creating a dangerous territory.
I do want to go to supply chain in a second, but going back to austerity for a minute, are there other programs that existed and didn't move, whether it's SNAP or I'm just trying to think of programs that are on the cutting block. Like if Republicans were in charge, we know that they would just forget about subsidizing anything during the pandemic. They would or pumping the economy a little bit during the pandemic. They would be slicing and dicing true austerity. Is there anything that you see on the table?
Well, there's a couple things to talk about. I mean, this time last year, everybody was getting an enhanced $300 a month in their unemployment benefits. That hasn't happened. That was cut off last September. The Build Back Better Act was supposed to be a cost reducer, right? I mean, it was supposed to reduce the cost of prescription drugs, reduce the cost of at-home elder care, reduce the cost of child care, reduce the cost of pre-kindergarten. That was all supposed to be free or heavily subsidized. When none of that happens, suddenly, the families are faced with the same costs that they have now, which are very exorbitant, and they struggle to keep those keep those together. So, it's the opportunity cost, right? It's the fact of not doing Build Back Better. The other thing is that we have been floating along without a Biden budget for his entire presidency.
That's
we have done continuing resolutions to fund the government. And the next one runs out February 18th. Now, I don't expect there's going to be a government shutdown. But when you do continuing resolutions to fund the government, you're not adding anything. You're not shaping the budget. You're essentially using a Trump framework for the budget, because it's what was put in place under the previous regime. You're just continuing the level of spending, the baseline levels that were there before. And so that creates, there's austerity, but there's also opportunity costs. There's the fact that you're not going beyond the baselines, that you're not increasing with the increased cost of living. That there are some cost of living increases built in, things like Social Security, which those payments went up 5.9% at the end of last year. But if you're talking about overall government spending, that has sort of floated along on the same baseline, and so that is another issue.
Who are the industries that are lobbying against? I mean, I live in New York City, and New York City, obviously New York City is a majority Democratic city council. I think there's one Republican, Democratic mayors, except for, our former Republican current mayor. With that being said, it's not like this is a town where vast progress happens. I mean, the real estate industry, NYPD, of course, are very powerful, but we have, 3K programs here. We have paid family leave. We have a lot of programs that are fairly progressive that should have been on the table in a Biden administration. So I'm curious, who are the forces that are lobbying Biden and the Democrats essentially and getting away with it that don't do it here in New York?
Right. I mean, well, certainly, and by the way, New York's not totally immune to this, right? University of New York has seen major budget cuts.
Yep,
we have a piece coming out about that just tomorrow, actually. But what I would say is that the big story about the economy right now is inflation. That's what everyone's talking about, right? We have this major inflation, and there are two kind of approaches to that. What are you going to do in response? And one of the approaches is that elite economists, people like Larry Summers and Jason Furman are talking about, is we spent too much money. We spent too much money in the American Rescue Plan, and we need to cut back. And we do this in two ways. Number one, we don't spend any more money. And number two, we use the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. And the effect of that is to throw people out of work. I mean, that's almost the stated goal of something like that. We want to reduce demand because that will reduce inflation. And the way to reduce demand is to make people poorer. Right?
Do people take this seriously still? I mean, I know he gets published, but
it's
how'd that work out in 2008? No, I know. But every time I read these pieces, it's like...
It's not that it's not being taken seriously. I mean, the Federal Reserve is talking very directly that they are going to raise interest rates, and they're going to raise interest rates as soon as January and certainly by March. And every time you raise interest rates, you make it harder for people to access credit. You make it harder on businesses to maintain their operations, and you lead to layoffs. I mean, that's almost like definitively what you do. And so that's one approach to dealing with the inflation. The other approach is to actually regulate the companies that are causing a lot of the inflation out there. And that's like the shipping companies that have seen profits that we've never seen before. This year, 2021, last year's profits in the ocean shipping industry, which is just the large container ships that go from China to here. Yeah. That year's profits in 2021 were equal to the profits of 2010 to 2020 combined. That's how much they made in 2021.
Okay, so is this so I'm curious, and this obviously leads to our supply chain issues too. Is this because of the increased demand under the lockdowns and pandemic and people, ordering stuff online, or
it's in
is
part
something else?
It's in part because of the increased demand, but it's also in part because of the way that we set up our supply chains. So we have the majority of our goods coming from halfway around the world that we have to bring here on boats. We have three. We have completely deregulated ocean shipping. So we have three what they call alliances that control about 80 to 90% of all shipping, and
Wow.
they have ultimate pricing power. If you want to get your stuff onto a ship, you have to go through one of these three alliances. It's a bunch of companies, but they all work in concert with each other, and they're coordinating with each other to raise prices. The cost of getting a 40-foot container on a ship from China to the West Coast was $2,000 in 2020. By August of 2021, it was $20,000. They raised the prices tenfold. I mean,
Wow.
that's where it's coming from. That's where the prices are coming from. Then the log jams that we're seeing at the ports are also due to the fact that these ships get bigger and bigger, because it makes economic sense for these large shipping companies to make bigger and bigger ships. That way, you're only going across once. Well, there are only certain ports that can handle ships of that size. And so you have a log jam at those particular ports. With respect to trucking, trucking is a completely crappy job. You wait in lines and you don't get paid until you get the load onto your truck. So you wait hours unpaid while you're waiting to get the truck put on, or the container put onto your chassis. And people don't want to do it. It's just, there's no money in it for truckers. They say there's a trucker shortage, but what there actually is a shortage of good jobs. And so all of these things raise prices. They raise
and then the
cost
trains
of moving things across.
You saw
Rail
what
as well.
happened. I mean, it's not necessarily directly related, but there was in California, there was that they're stealing things off of the trains now.
That's a common problem, but it is directly related, because we used to have 40 Class 1 train companies in America. Now we have 7.
Oh, interesting.
And really we have 4, and 2 handle the West Coast and 2 handle the East Coast. So it's really 2 duopolies, and they have cut it during this whole supply chain crisis. Rail companies have been laying off workers. They have been cutting price, because cutting labor costs looks good to investors on Wall Street, and they take their cues from investors on Wall Street. So the reason that there's like mass crime on these rail cars, there's nobody's watching. There's it's like an absentee situation. There are no workers.
And then simultaneously, this is the same Wall Street that the other companies that I'm going to guess are depending on these goods or selling these goods. They want them to soar. So is there like a disconnect on Wall Street? Do they have conversations with each other? I mean, I hate to be so basic, but I'm like, we have team meetings and we go, if you do this, that could affect this, and this could affect that.
The larger problem is that we have run our commerce on the basis of a handful of philosophies. One is globalization, outsourcing to the lowest labor that we can possibly find, lowest cost labor. We've done this thing called just-in-time logistics, where we don't have any inventory, we don't have anything in a warehouse that as reserve capacity in case something goes wrong. We get the thing from the boat in China, we get it right to the store, and you buy it. And we only get as much as we think we're going to be able to sell. That's another philosophy. Monopolization is another philosophy. It's more efficient if there's just a few companies rather than a bunch of companies. Right. Deregulation, another philosophy. Let's deregulate the trucking industry. Let's deregulate the rail industry. Both of those were done in the Carter administration. Let's deregulate ocean shipping. That was done in the Clinton administration. And then financialization. Wall Street rules all. Shareholder value is the most important thing, and we're going to run these businesses on the basis of how many returns we can get for the shareholders. Those philosophies broke the supply chain. That's the reason that we have shortages, and that's the reason that we have this inflation. And until we get a handle on that and actually reverse those philosophies, we're going to continue to see it. Because what we did is we introduced this risk. This was working fine until it wasn't, right? And as soon as there's a problem, whether it's the pandemic or whether it's a fire at a factory in Japan that reduced a lot of our semiconductor production, or whether it's just bad weather that shuts down a port or shuts down a road that a truck can't get down, all of a sudden that magnifies because there's only one, right? We are on this knife edge with this.
Or the Suez Canal ship. Remember that one?
Or the Suez Canal ship. I mean, there's any of a dozen things that can cause a disruption. And a disruption magnifies all around the world because of the way we engineered our supply chain.
I'll give you an example. You know, our audience knows I've been doing a documentary in Puerto Rico on disaster capitalism for 4 years. And today, now, there's two industries in which one, not so much of an effect financially, just in terms of quality. The coffee industry in Puerto Rico, they have some of the best coffee in the world. And I noticed, I think last year was like, it doesn't taste the same. I'm not sure what's going on. And one of my friends, who's a very well-known lawyer there, said to me, oh, it's because when the hurricane came, it wiped out the crops. And so you're actually tasting now post-hurricane coffee as opposed to pre-hurricane coffee, because it's always, a few years behind. And then the second, which has very serious consequences, is Puerto Rico is the pharmaceutical capital of the world. And my mother, just a personal, she said to me the other day, she goes, I can't get my thyroid medicine and I have to take it now. Once they put you on it, you're like stuck for life. And I said, well, what happened? She goes, they can't, in the thyroid medicine, they get it from a pig's, like something in pigs.
Yeah.
And all of the pigs on the island were killed during the hurricane. So there's a backflow. I mean,
I'll give you another one. And I actually wrote about it.
This could be a game, by the way. We could just do this every week and talk about what else is being disrupted.
I wrote about this in my book, Monopolized. Hurricane Maria knocked out a lot of production at factories in Puerto Rico. One of the factories, run by Baxter International, produces about half of the nation's IV bags. And so what is an IV bag? It's salt and water in a bag, in a sterilized plastic bag. And what this did in 2017 is it created a ripple effect all around the country at hospitals where they just didn't have IV bags. And I tell this story in my book of a couple. The woman is getting cancer treatment, and they're having to do it manually, like through a syringe. She's having to get, and it has to be very precise the way it goes in. So this nurse is giving a very precise treatment. And her husband says, well, why are you doing this? So don't you usually do an IV? And it's like, oh yeah, we're out of IVs because of Puerto Rico, because of the hurricane. And he's sitting in La Jolla in a hospital with a bank of windows looking over the Pacific Ocean, hearing that they're out of salt and water in a bag. He's looking at a sea of salt and water and being told they can't find any salt and water. So this is the absurdity.
I think this is a don't look up moment. A don't look up moment.
Completely. This is the absurdity that's built into our supply chains and built into our commerce. And I'll give you one other thing that is driving a lot of this, and that is corporate greed. So, and you don't have to look very hard to find this. Companies are at a 70-year high of corporate profits, even though they're supposed to have all these increased inputs because of, added shipping costs, added supply chain costs. If you go and listen to earnings calls from companies like Procter & Gamble or Unilever or just Kroger, any groceries chain, any product manufacturer, they'll say, oh yeah, well, we have a lot of pricing power right now, and we're using this as a good opportunity to raise prices. So yes, there is inflation, and that's inflation is being caused by various factors, including what we've talked about. But companies, pricing is a choice, and companies are making the choice to use the headlines around inflation as an excuse to raise prices more, directly going into their profits.
Before you wrap, I know you touched on this in one of your articles. Can you tell us about the meat industry and how that's affecting food prices right now?
Yes, meat is actually one of the largest drivers of inflation increases until the last month, and we'll talk about that at the end here. But it was one of the largest drivers. Beef, pork, chicken. These are also very concentrated industries. Meat processors control I think it's 4 meat processors that control between 60 and 85% of the meat industry in those various different goods, whether it's poultry or beef or pork. And what we've seen over the last year is that they are buying cattle and hogs and chicks at very low prices, but they are selling the finished product. They're like a middleman, right? They process the meat in the slaughterhouses, whatever. And they're selling it to grocery stores at very high prices, and they're pocketing the difference. And
there's no regulation of this. This seems like it's.
Well, the White House has been talking about this a lot,
Yeah.
right? And there's supposed to be a set of laws under the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921, which I know you know by heart, that are supposed to guard against this anti-competitive behavior.
Right.
Because basically you have a monopoly in the middle, sitting in the middle, price gouging.
Yeah.
And the administration has been talking about this a lot, whether it's the National Economic Council or Biden himself, and they're talking about new rules that they're putting in place. Well, lo and behold, in December, meat prices went down. And the only real answer to why meat prices went down, because a lot of these programs that the administration is talking about, they haven't been put in place yet. It's because they're talking about it. It's a signal to these companies that, yeah, regulation is coming. So you better kind of lay low for a little while and not take out these massive profits because it's reputationally very bad for you.
Wow.
And what that shows is that governments are not powerless in the face of all of these things that we're talking about. They have the ability to use executive power, even if it's the bully pulpit, even if it's just talking about the increasing prices, or use regulation that they have the authority to do through through the USDA, for example, the Department of Agriculture. They can do this, and it can have a material effect and have an immediate effect.
And the meat prices are affecting the rest of the food industry too. It's not just meat; it's affecting the cost of other like, whatever.
Well, meat sometimes is an input into
vegetables.
Goods. Yeah, I mean, meat is an input into other goods, of course,
exactly.
and you have dairy prices going up as well because it's the same basic structure. But if you look at your overall grocery bill, the prices that are really going up are beef, they are chicken, they are pork. And now maybe, considering the environmental impact of all of those, maybe that's a good thing, right?
I know. I'm like,
maybe they should be going up, and maybe we should be eating less meat.
But
the larger point is the reason why those prices are going up, and it's because you have a middleman that is taking profits, and that can be true in a whole host of industries. It doesn't have to be just meat.
And I love that you ended with a bully pulpit, because this is, I think, the big question on everybody's mind right now. And we hope to have you on again soon, because I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon. But the power of the administration to signal that we're going to crack down, we're going to investigate, AKA, we're going to investigate you, Manchin, or you can't get, they have power, whether they actually have real power in the Senate. Senator Schumer.
Do have power. And there are a lot of examples. So, I'll give you an example. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau made an announcement, I believe in December, that they were going to go after big banks that were making a lot of money off overdraft fees.
Right.
Like, where you overdraw your account and all of a sudden they hit you with a $35 fee, things like that. They signaled very strongly, like, we're not going to tolerate that. We're going to investigate you. Since they said that, Bank of America has changed their policies, went down from $35 to $10. JP Morgan Chase, and these are companies that the CFPB explicitly mentioned. JP Morgan Chase changed their policies, made it harder to draw an overdraft fee. Wells Fargo did the exact same thing. So, these things are signals. When regulators say we're going to regulate you, usually corporations get that message, and they change their policies. And it's important to know that, and for these agencies to realize that power.
Student loans, I'm going to say a little bit. Also, this is how you win an election. We're going into in 2 moves, Joe Biden, he could potentially hold the Senate. I don't know about the House at this point, but he could really, exercise his bully pulpit power.
Well, look, about a month and a half ago, Jen Psaki got up at her press conference, and she said, "What do you want us to do? Give everybody COVID tests in the mail? Like, how could we possibly do that?" Yesterday, they started a website that do exactly that, and the website was great. You know, I put in my address, and I was done. Like, what other government program is that easy, right? And you know, presuming they all show up in 7 to 12 days, which is what they
Fair
said.
enough.
But presuming that happens, I mean, that's exactly what they should be doing. And whether it's, you know, cancellation of student debt, which you referred to, or changing the Controlled Substances Act to make marijuana effectively legal, or using the power of the Health and Human Services Agency to lower prescription drug prices, which they absolutely have the ability to do, or doing all these things that we were talking about, and also making sure everybody knows, like, if your overdraft fee just went down from $35 to $10, do you thank Bank of America for that? Or do you thank the CFPB who said, we're going to go after your ass if you do that?
That's right.
You have to not only make it visible to people and make tangible benefits to people, but you have to let them know why it happened.
Exactly. Carry the win. It's about, you know, being creative with our government. I think we get stuck in these, they're not doldrums, but these cycles of it's this person's fault, which problematic, yes, but of course there's other avenues as well. So David, I'd love to have you on, because maybe we can have these creative sessions and get people to think outside the box, that changing society can happen through other means. So
always happy to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, David. Take care. Right. Hey, if you're not already a patron, please join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. This is how we fund an independent media show. We launched right before COVID, as everybody knows, and we don't do the grifty thing in terms of whatever the controversy is of the moment that pulls people in. But that also makes our show, I think, more, we have a great quality audience, a deep thinking audience, an audience that wants to learn how to activate and organize and thinks globally as well as locally. We have a lot of global conversations on this channel, on this show. We, of course, have the committee program, and we're going to launch another program soon, Solidarity Wednesdays. This is all doable because of our patrons, and you can join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show.